Welcome back to another episode of Straight Talking Leadership with me, Chris Pinkowski. My guest today is John Swoyer. I'm going to read a quick intro on John. So John serves as the CEO of the MaST Schools network. It's a K-12 network of schools in Philadelphia, serving 4,700 students across three schools: MaST, MaST 1, or MaST 2, and MaST 3. He's actually been with MaST since 2004, 20th anniversary this year, since it was only a single charter school. And he's worked his way up through leadership. He's been in different roles, including Director of Technology, Chief Information Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and became CEO in 2011. Under John's leadership, MaST is ranked one of the top charter schools in Pennsylvania. It's also won many other awards, including being named a National Blue Ribbon school. He's led the school through innovation and design, where MaST is now a Apple Distinguished Partner and also recognized as a P21 exemplar school. So MaST operates under the STREAM model of education: science, technology, robotics, engineering, art, and math. And some of the innovative spaces that MaST has across their schools are state-of-the-art libraries and media centers, e-gaming and fitness centers, lower and high school maker spaces, a Ninja Warrior gym, Build It Center, science labs, and a robotics lab. So the MaST model's in such high demand in Philadelphia, with more than 20,000 applicants each year for only a few hundred open slots. It was once quoted on the news as MaST is harder to get into than Harvard. In addition to leading one of the most high-performing networks of schools in Philadelphia, John is also a husband, a father, and an avid basketball fan. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. So one of the things I like to do before we get talking about leadership is a warm-up that I call the Mad Minute. It's basically a couple questions, has nothing to do with leadership. It's just about getting us warmed up and getting us ready for a conversation. You ready for the Mad Minute?
I'm ready.
All right. So question number one. You've been invited to a 3-on-3 basketball tournament. The winner gets indefinite funding for their school with no cap. You get to pick two people to play with, NBA players, past or present, in their prime. Who's your squad?
All right. So Michael Jordan, no doubt. I still think the best player of all time, at least visibly what I've seen over time. I would probably go Wilt Chamberlain, just so I get some height, and still like to see what he would do in today's game. So that would be my two. Do I get a sub?
Yeah, let's give a sub.
So I think I go Steph Curry, right? Because I can come off the screen, kick it to a shooter on the side, probably the best shooter of all time, and probably my favorite current player. So that's who I would pick for.
So Jordan, Chamberlain, and Curry as a sub.
Yep, scorer, shooter, and a center. That's all I need.
Awesome, I love it. Yep. Second question, two-parter: DC or Marvel?
DC, definitely.
Okay, you get a call from DC, and they say, we've got one of our superheroes retiring. They don't tell you who it is. Who is it that you want to replace in the DC universe?
Oh, let me think about that for a second. I've always been Batman. So part of the reason I feel like I think I would stick with Batman as my character. One, the kids know me as Batman. My counterpart was Scott Blair and Superman, but primarily because he has no true superpower. Everything he's done has been by influence, experience. It did help that he had a little bit of money, but I think that would be the character I'd replace. Just again because that's kind of been my role in the superhero universe here. So
the pictures of you and Scott walking around the school halls as Batman and Superman are awesome.
There is to add to that, we walked around Longcrest at one point in our get-ups as well. So that was quite the experience too, crossing the street for MaST 2 in Longcrest. Pretty funny.
I mean, that just makes the experience for the kids. Like that's just one of the things that makes MaST, so special, in my opinion.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So let's talk about leadership. Purpose of these interviews is really to talk to interesting people, learn some nuggets of information that other folks that are going to watch or listen to this can take away and apply in real life. Yeah. Let's start at the beginning. What was your first experience in leading people, and how did that go?
So my first experience in leading people, ironically, was I worked at Sears, no longer obviously around, but it was right out of I came from a blue collar household. My dad eventually was white collar and opened a business, but he was in construction and prosthetics. He went to college at night. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Rawhurst, in the lower Northeast area. I spent a lot of time in the lower Northeast area, but what I learned right away was like, when I turned 14, 15, you got to go out and work. It was always about work ethic, always helping out and doing things. And my dad instilled that. So when I got to get a job, my friend worked in hardware at Sears. And it's probably one of my favorite jobs of all time. But I thought I was going there to work in hardware, and I got put in children's clothing. So I spent my Friday nights in high school selling everything from baby strollers to kids' clothing to the only cool part about it at that point is video games happened to be in that area. I met some good friends there, but every weekend, nobody wanted to work Friday night. So I got put on the floor. I think my hourly rate was $5.15, which people can't fathom. And I was excited, $5.15 to drive, and I worked in Will Grove, so it was a little bit of a drive. It was the only way I was able to get a car is if I worked. So my first night, like I will never forget, there was a call out, and there was we had different stations you had to work at. You had different zones, so you rotated. And quickly I learned that our manager, kind of wanted sub leadership when she wasn't there. So I was instilled quickly as like a floor leader. And eventually I was going to leave there, and she said, why don't you try commission sales? So I ended up going down to the lawn and garden department. So I learned everything you need to know about lawn mowers, tractor trailers, weed whackers, not tractor trailers, tractors, like riding mowers. And also you had treadmills in that area. So again, what you find out sometimes is that retail is a pass-through job for a lot of people, and they wanted floor leaders. So I quickly learned as much as I could about sales and commission sales, and I did very well. And again, every Friday, Saturday morning, they kind of instilled, that was my first instilled component of leadership, was to basically lead that floor. So I ended up being the leading commission salesperson. And when you do good in commission sales, they want you to go to the busy areas. So then at Christmas time, holiday time, I got moved to big screen TVs. So that's when the plasma TV came out. A plasma TV at that time was like $8,000. It was a Pioneer TV. It was one of my first interests in electronics. And what I learned is like, I'm going to figure out what TVs I would buy and learn the top 3 TVs I would buy and all of their features. And that's what I would sell at Christmas and the holidays. Again, did very well, but my instilled leadership was the one, help others, learn about customer service, right? Because the customer is always right. And then also just responsibility wise, they would trust me on the floor to kind of lead these other sales associates, even people who had been there for a long time. So that was the first time where I felt like, I was kind of out there. I had to present leadership. I had to do the right thing. And I won a couple customer service awards there while I did it. I kept that job even when I started at MaST.
Really?
I did for a couple of years. Yeah, I worked 2 jobs. I've always worked multiple jobs, honestly. I had an IT business that I started later when I started working at MaST. I've always just been a multitasker. It's just how my mind works. But it's also given me experience with different people in different places. So, when you start, like when I started I had a technology LLC, 2000, maybe 6 or 7, I got my MBA. The first thing you're trying to figure out is like, who's my first customer going to be? So my first customer was an architect. So I learned quickly that architects don't want you to work when they're working. And architect schedules are crazy. They do things in the middle of the night. They do things early in the morning. So it was always, hey, I'm going to give you a key to my shop. I need you to come work on the technology when I'm not here, which was often unusual hours. But again, it was trusting myself in that component, because now I'm essentially leading even though it was a single LLC, it was me leading myself into opportunities and trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way for me to communicate? How do I be responsive? How do I make sure that I'm getting back to people on time? How am I tracking that? There was just different skill sets that I picked up along the way. So that was really my first taste of leadership. Now, managing people, I think, is a different leadership quality. But.
Yeah. How do you distinguish between managing people and leadership? Because I agree, they are two different skill sets. They're two different outcomes that come from it. But what's your distinguish? How do you distinguish it?
So humbly, I would say that my whole thing has always been work ethic. So if I get into a position that I'm not where, I'm always going to try to learn till this day. Like, I certainly don't know everything. I try to watch leadership at the level of Fortune 500 companies, paying attention to the way that people speak. How do I connect to people? I think the difference is personalities, right? So like, ultimately, when you go into the MaST position, and I'll talk about failure later, but like the MaST position for me was, I have to come in and be a leader of a building in technology. And so when I got that job, MaST had consultants in that business that they were making a lot of money. So as soon as they hired me, the first thing they said to me was, we were looking for a technology guy for 12 months. I said, 12 months? You couldn't find a technology guy? Well, we couldn't find a technology guy, and this is what we were going to pay, and this is what we were expecting. And, we want you to come in and we have a T in our name, but technology has a long way to go here. It's just run by the parents and a consultant company. My first day on the job, these two gentlemen come in shorts, and they drop off the servers. And they go, oh, we were just notified that we were laid off from helping out the school. We were told to drop all this off to you. And they just started bringing in all the things that they were supposed to install. And I went to our CEO. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. I went to our CEO at the time, and I said, I didn't know Mrs. Del Garcio at the time, and I knew Mr. Brophy, Jan Brophy's husband, who was an unbelievable man, helped me out a long way. But I was like, oh, was there anybody else? And they're like, oh, you can talk to the computer teacher, but one of the reasons we hired you is really to get this off the ground, and it's a mess. And here's your closet. And I worked out of a closet. They called it the IT closet, and the closet had an air conditioner in one room, and it was maybe 400 square feet. Eventually, we knocked the wall down. And I got a bigger closet, but I worked out of the closet in the front lobby, believe it or not, as the IT person, and I spent a lot of lonely nights there. I ran cable, but what I accepted in that was that I was able to dictate and do whatever I wanted in terms of leading myself, right? Like, I could choose when to come in, when to leave. And what I really appreciated at that point was our CEO at the time and Mrs. Del Garcio were like, hey, sign in for a few more hours. Like, you're putting in all this extra time. We appreciate it. And so I picked that up, right? Like, it's one thing I've taken to today. Like, when I see somebody who does a lot of extra work in the school, but doesn't ask for money, I appreciate that more than a person who comes in and goes, I did all this. When am I getting paid? Now, maybe there's somewhere in between, like, hey, just let you know I did all this. But like, if somebody painted a mural out of, just took all this time and did a mural, and we're like, oh, you know what? They put a lot of extra hours in. Let's pay them for that time, right? Because I think it's just the appreciation that they went and did it. And I've learned that, it's helpful. So I think that's one thing. When you go to lead people, I think the difference is you have to figure out how to read their personalities, because everybody's personality is different. You got people that expect you to fix their computer. This is in the first position I was there immediately, right? You got people who expect you to call them back, 9 o'clock at night. And I really did that. I took it like I remember calling a teacher. I just left your classroom. Want to let you know your printer's good for tomorrow. And they're like, how'd you get my number? Oh, I looked it up in the Power School system. 9 o'clock at night. This is 2005, 2006. And by the way, if you need help, I'll be here at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Let me know, and I'll come down and help you. So I tried to do that at that level when I first started, and I think it went a long way. We've got a lot of people at MaST that have been there for a long time, but I think it's relationship driven. I think the motivation of working on your own is setting a schedule and being like, I'm going to do this. I have to make sure I'm putting myself in a good position. So I think that's the difference. But the personality is 100%. And customer service, that Sears job, I'll tell you, my mom and my dad both worked at Sears. They met at Sears, and it did a lot for me. Like, it just did a lot for me. And it presented, there were other challenges. I was looking for a job that I feel like motivated me, which we can talk about a little bit. But
it's funny because I hear a lot how retail jobs can really set someone up for success in the long term, because there are so many components. Like, you have to become comfortable talking to strangers. You've got to be comfortable knowing a whole lot about a lot of different things. And you've got to be the person that's delivering service. And it's like a service mindset, but that really is foundational to leadership in my opinion, because if you're not serving the people that you lead and serving the people that are buying your products or your services, that's where the breakdown happens. And that's what really distinguishes a good leader from a not so good leader, is that service mindset. And I think, a lot of times as I speak to other leaders, that retail early on in life really sets them up for success later on.
Yeah, I certainly believe it. My son just started working at Rita's Water Ice, and he's 14.
Okay.
And he's been picking up extra shifts. They use this app, and this past year he was doing a little bit of reffing. Had to motivate him a little bit and say, hey, like, they're looking for someone to do it's grades 1 and 2 basketball. But I've already seen him. He wants to get more shifts, and you get a taste of getting paid to do a service. And I just heard a story the other night that a customer somehow got overcharged by somebody, and was a little bit upset. And now you see that, like, you see the emotion, like, how do I de-escalate a situation? I got to tell you, when you work in an environment with kids, like, the de-escalation, the relationship, the understanding of all those things is super important. And it's just a normal human communication tool, but it's amazing what retail sets you up for. I think it gives you experiences and all that, all different walks of life.
I know, like, for us, my oldest son, he was kind of shy in middle school, didn't like talking to strangers. And I think, like, early on in life, my wife really instilled, like, the stranger danger thing, and he just took it to another level. Got his first job at Wendy's, and he, like, came out of his shell, because you're forced to interact with people. And now, like, all my kids.
Yeah.
But
Chris is touring today with me at we have a visit today. He's supposed to come, I think, 45. Yep.
Like, he'll come home and tell me, the city council tour last week or the week before, and all these different things that he does. And I give a lot of credit to that job at Wendy's for kind of forcing him out of his shell and him becoming who he is now. Like, and now he works in the mall at Spencer's, and he does the same kind of thing. But, it's definitely, you see that shift, and it's pretty cool to see.
What's tough nowadays is, like, even the mall. I was just talking to someone, and probably, if you think about it, right? Like, I mean, I don't know, maybe Jake, 8th grade, Ben's in 10th grade. Like, the malls are fading, right? And so, right, so, like, you wonder, by the time they're able to get jobs, for 8th grade, it's like, by the time they're able to get real jobs, what's that market going to look like? Should you be preparing your kids for the AI world and the communication world and the online world? And it's just a different, it's different. It's definitely different. But I agree with you 100% on the retail side. Like, I think any job where you are forced to face the public in a position where there's an exchange of services or exchange of communication definitely helps. Yep, I would agree.
Yeah, no doubt. What would you say over the past 10 years, and you've been the CEO at MaST, you took that position in 2011 when it was just one school, right? And now you've got 3 schools. Basically, I like to equate it to, you kind of run a school district that's like the size of a small town, right? 4,700 kids across 3 schools.
Yep.
But what has changed the most over the past 10 years in the way that you approach leadership?
So my first year in, I was 29. I looked like I was 22. I actually got carded at the movies that year. I always looked young, and people would say to me, and I'm not even kidding, I carded at the movies. I remember me and Cheryl going to a movie, and she was just making fun of me. But basically, that first year, I get in there and I go to the parent meeting, and when you get so in my position at the time, nobody saw that coming, and I was approached because at that point there was a few things that had changed. One, Mr. Brophy had passed away, and he had done a kind of an intermediate group of services, including student scheduling. So Mrs. Del Garcia at the time, our board president, said, and just in terms of who these people were, Mr. Brophy was our student information services person. Mrs. Del Garcia was the board president. So they reached out and said, can you take on scheduling and kind of merge your job? And that's how the chief information officer job was formed, because I was doing IT and built some of the building design, which I later learned to love, because if you can get kids excited about a space, it draws attention not only for the public, but also for people wanting the way that people learn. So when that leadership part happened early on, it was like, let me go out and get in front of these parents and do I want to change my career? Basically, I was faced with, do I want to go from this IT operations person, student scheduling, busing, things I had never encountered. That's how I got the opportunity, because at that point I was doing all these things, and there was a shift to bring in a CEO that was in charge of fundraising, and just things weren't, they just weren't working the way that the board wanted them to work. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, do I change my career? Because that's really what it was about. Like, I was doing well with the IT business. I had worked at MaST. I had liked what I was doing. I was teaching teachers about software. We were putting Promethean boards in. So I'm thinking of all that. And then I'm doing student scheduling and operations in the parent group. So I go to this meeting, and one of the parents goes, you know when this new gentleman's coming in? And I said, that's me. And they're like, you're the new CEO? You look like a student. And then, what I quickly learned, I'm not even kidding, I quickly learned was like, and I kept thinking about my mom being an educator, Cheryl being a special, my wife is a special education teacher and an elementary teacher. She was teaching first grade when I met her at MaST. She went to another school district, but I'm like, I'm in this world of education in my own households, and like, I need to learn more about educating kids, because when they had made the CEO job at that point was a fundraising operational person. And I quickly realized, like, I need to set goals for this school. First, I need to get parents to trust me. My second day, Chris, I got I'll never forget. I still talk to his parent. His kids went to Drexel and Penn. A couple of his kids actually went to those 2 schools, and great schools in Philly. But like, I got this not very nice email that was like 6 paragraphs long, my second day, about everything that was wrong at MaST. And I'm reading this and I'm like, and then we also had a parent group that was struggling at the time, and we had to change some stuff there. So I had taken a marketing class that I absolutely loved, and an entrepreneurship class I loved in my MBA program. And I was like, I'm running a school, but I'm really running a business that educates kids, but it's got all these other facets. And how do I get people excited about this school? And I'm reading this email. I think I still have the email. And I'm reading it over and over and over. And it's like, we have this, but we don't use this. And we have this, but we don't, the kids don't even know what the video studio is. And so I'm writing all these notes down, and I'm like, and I took everything personal. And so I start writing all these things out, and I'm like, okay, I need a person to do this. I need a person to do this. I don't have any of these people. I can do all this myself. So my first year, I went to 180 events. We reinvented things that, like, at the time, we had good programs in the school. We had good sports in the school. MaST was a good school. It had been recognized, and to the people who ran it before, it was on the map. It had a wait list of 800 kids. We took that wait list from 800 to 12,000 in 5 years. And the way that we did that was, and I say we because it was hiring the right people. So my first 6-7 people in were really important to the organization. And it was like, okay, I need somebody who's going to be part of the communications and understand that we want to really brand this out. We don't want this to look like clip art brochures and then how do we communicate this out? Well, we're going to build a marketing list to our families that tells our families everything that's going on. Things that today just work. Like, I just read the newsletter, the MaST Tribune. It's great. It's highlighting the softball. There's always opinion articles in it. High school does a great job. But Miss Spellman, who's now the coordinator there. But what we did is we said, let's do programs like, let's educate families on all the awesome things that are going to come. So programs like that first year, we had kids driving around robots. In the future, like as we started to build on that, we opened up a new playground. The second thing in the early was like, let me go talk to the kids. So I would go to the different classrooms, like, what do you guys want? I like Legos. I would go home to my kids. They're like, hi, we're playing Wii Fitness. And so I quickly realized that, like, if I want to get the school to be an exciting place that people want to come to, I need to listen to the stakeholders. Sounds like something out of a textbook, not brain surgery. Like, let me listen to here every day. Oh, I love Legos. Like, can we get to build Legos? I was like, oh, maybe we'll do a Lego center. So I learned everything about Lego, the 4 primary colors, why they went to pink and purple Legos. Like, I learned everything about Legos. And then I was like, all right, so I would draw. I taught myself how to use a 3D design program. I designed the Lego center. I said, how do we build this? Oh, we can do it in a mill workshop. We can do. So so it was like creativity became this focus. And the more I talked to kids, the more excited I got. And the one kid was like, I'll never forget, the one kid was like, what if we don't have it anymore, but at the time was like, what if we put a chessboard out on the on the playground? So we did this chessboard. Ironically, 6 years later, chess was reinvented and became a huge thing. We had these gigantic chess pieces, and there was a picture in the Inquirer, or not the Inquirer. It was like the Inquirer did the article on the playground, but it might have been Northeast Times. Someone picked up the picture of the chessboard. It was like, this is super cool. And everywhere I went, I still, till this day, this past weekend, I was traveling and I took some pictures of some cool things where I had traveled. And, it's like, how could we reinvent that? So then the floor projection screen, which you mentioned, was like, how do we put books on the floor? Because at that point it was the Nook, the Kindle, and the iPad. And that was my first big thing. We're opening this new media center. I took over this position. This is going to be I want this to be more in the library. It's not a library. It's a library in terms of its function with books, but how do we make this a technology center, which became the media center? And we figured out a way to reverse the cabling to a serial cable, so we could reverse the projection onto the floor via the iPad, because at that point AirPlay didn't exist. And I was like, let's go with the iPad. At that point, people were buying Nooks from Barnes and Noble. The Kindle had come out, but it was black and white. I was like, let's just try the iPad, right? And Toy Story had this app, and there's a picture at that time that the newspaper took. It was like me laying with the kids on the ground with the floor, and it was this interactive Toy Story book. And that just got my mindset going to, like, there's so many cool things that we could do, where if we just have some of these engaging spaces, there's always going to be math classrooms, science classrooms. We can make those innovative too. There's innovative walls and writing on the wall and different things that you see today in MaST. But these cool spaces need to get people excited. Like, they're the pictures we want to put out there. This is what we're going to be different in. It took a while, but we did the neighborhoods. Like, our team stayed there till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. We're ordering pizzas. We're hanging up magnet boards. It was like, let's make the elementary school look like an education museum. And that was, when we were doing that hallway, like, we were painting over murals that had been there for a long time. We're like, we have to reinvent this space. And people were like, we're destroying the hallway. We weren't. We were reinventing. So another thing that I learned over time was, like, key spaces, it needs to be fluid. That's why our lobby has TVs and not pictures as much. Like, we have pictures, but, like, those pictures, the frames open up. We can change those pictures anytime, but the TVs are there. It's not a place to put a mural, because when you put a mural, it represents something somebody did, and it's really hard to change. So we want murals on walls that aren't going to change, right? Stairwells, things that people see every day, but they're not necessarily like educational spaces where you come in and it's the first thing you see, because we want that to constantly be changing. So it's just like little things like that. And so when the kids do the murals at the end of the hallways, like, it gets people excited about the hallways and they see it every day. But it's just small things, like, over time that we're all connected to this. So that was early on. You flash forward 10 years to now. How do you do that across scale, right? And I think that's a simpler answer. That's trying to find people that buy into the vision and that you empower them with their skill set. So I would answer that like 2 ways. One, when we hire somebody, I always ask two questions. I already know they want to be a teacher, right? So how do you get kids excited? And then what's your other passion? I know you want to be here to teach. I'm assuming you're coming here because you went through school. We're going to teach you, or you're going to get that experience on the ground. School's not going to teach you how to teach. The experience is going to teach you, right? Just like any other job. But
Right.
tell me what else you can bring to the school. Just talking last night to a teacher at MaST 3 who we just bought a kiln and we're doing a pottery program. And she brought that idea from a school she went to as a kid, and she's super passionate about it, right? Like that's awesome because now I have somebody who loves to do that, who wants to be at the school to do that. And to me, that's a trick of the trade. Like, let me find out what else you can bring to the table. What is your full, if I wanted to put it out there, what do you love, right? I love basketball because it's a great way to relate to students. So like with MaST High School, when we opened it up, it was kids from all over the city. That's what people don't realize. When you run a school district, like you're looking at kids that are coming from all different neighborhoods all across Philly. So every neighborhood represents something different, right? There's a
Right.
different culture, there's a different philosophy, there's a different, when you put them all in one place, you have to figure out what you can connect to. I would say, like, even if a kid doesn't play basketball, just to go into a gym and dribble a basketball, shoot a basketball, you'll find kids, they just want to go in and do something in a gym. That's like one connection. Not everybody is necessarily interested in a club. Not every kid's interested in drama, but most of the kids will step into a gym and do something. So I think those are some of the things that we've tried to diversify our options. Like we have kids that love drama, we have kids that love sports, we have kids that love both. How do we get those connections into our school? So 10 years now, we want each school to have 60 or 70 programs. When I first started, it was like, all right, let's make sure we have a gym here. Like, let's make sure we offer sports. All right, we want to offer a drama club. We want to do this. Now I want the kids to tell me, what do you want in your school? So I always bring up Pokemon Club. Kid came to me, wanted a Pokemon Club. I said, if you can get 10 of your friends to be in the Pokemon Club or 15 kids to be in the Pokemon Club, I'll find you a club sponsor. Kid found 8 kids originally. We ended up doing the club, Magic Card Club. Like, it was just hearing kids out for what they wanted and understanding that, like, there was a connection. Not every kid is going to want to play basketball, but they're going to find something, right? Like they're going to find something that they, and I always related the gym to PE. So like PE, you have to take it. The state's mandating that you have to do a physical education. So like that's a no-brainer. Every kid has to have it. So in your building design, as you're looking at, you got to have a physical education space. But there's so many other things that you can do out of physical education space. You can do your pep rally. You can do your music, out of there. You can do your instrumental concerts out of there. So I think those are the things along the way that I've realized now. It's like, this is our template for what we want the school to look like. When I was first starting out, it was like, let me go listen to what kids want. I'm not sure. I haven't done this job. Now I have an idea of that. And so, like, for example, I just met with the student council at the third school last week. In ninth grade, what do you want the new high school to be? We're at grade 9. Where do we want to be by grade 12? And they have great ideas. Like that's the first thing you want to do when you run a school is you want to figure out, because they are your customer. Really, they're your customer. 8 hours a day, probably 10 or 12 hours a day. They're your customer. And then, secondary to that is their parents, because up until at least the age of 16, every decision that they're making is being dictated by their parents. Like, you have to have approval. Once you get to 16, there's some law and rules around decision making. But I think, that's where I was then. And then again, the scalability of that. Can we have different clubs at different schools? Sure, because you have different customers at different schools. So it's not like a road. It's not. I've seen schools across the country open up schools where they just open up with the same template. I think the template's got to be there, but the options can be different. It's like, it's like having 3 different restaurants. They can all be successful, but there might be little differences. But every restaurant's going to have beverages. You're probably going to see your water, your Coke, your Pepsi, your milks, orange juice, or whatever, but they might have other options in terms of what the appetizers are. That's how I look at it. But it's easier said than done.
Yeah, it is. But, there's a common thread that seems to have like 3 elements that you've applied from then all the way up until now. And it's number 1, like, talk to and listen to your stakeholders, right? Your customers, the people that are taking advantage or consuming your services. Number 2, be able to transform that into action and inspire others, right? You talked about the neighborhoods, and it was the team, right? It was, and I know that you were spending late nights there as well, but it wasn't just you, right? It was other people that bought into your vision because you connected it back to what's best for our stakeholders, our students and our teachers. The team got inspired by it, but then also find passion in other people that you're able to allow them to run with and say, yeah, let's create a pottery club. Let's create this. So yeah, you're coming here to do one job, but you've got a passion that I want to tap into, because that is also going to benefit. It comes full circle. That's going to benefit our kids. That's going to inspire the rest of our team. It's going to inspire you. And that seems like the secret recipe right there.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would also add, and not to be forgotten, is, the people that are in front of kids every day are the teachers. You have a lot of staff in a school that are important. You need the person who's opening the car doors in the morning. You need the facilities guys to make sure that buildings are clean and updated. There's just so many roles, right? I don't even want to name them all because I wouldn't want to forget anybody. Everybody has a part.
Right.
What's tough, what's hard at times is, and again, going from year 2011 to 2024, this job has a lot of office time that's connected to meetings, right? Student meetings with parents can be 2 hours, 3 hours. Discipline meetings can be 2 hours. Academic meetings, and you go through quickly in your week and you try to balance out, like, all right, I want to get to this, or I want to get to this. And you realize that it was much easier on one school to do that, and your role changes. And I think what's hard is people don't know how your role changes. So the relationship you have with your employees, there are employees till this day that we've hired during that period of time where it's like, I haven't really gotten to know that employee. We hired him during COVID, or we hired him last year. And I just haven't had that opportunity. Whereas when I first started, it was like, I'm going to go to grade group. We're starting grade groups. We're going to start department leads. We're going to have committees. I'm going to run 3 committees. I'm going to run the wellness committee, the technology committee. I'm going to run the strategic planning committee. It's hard. And I think people don't understand that there's still 24 hours in a day. Even if you work 17 or 18 hours, like, it's not enough. I could literally work 24 hours a day, and whether people would know it or not, it would have an impact on me. And I think you have to have something else. So I think the teachers, like, you can't forget that they're really, really the key part to the kids, because they're the ones that are going to get the holiday cards. They're the ones that are going to get the thank you letters. They're the ones that are going to get the I changed my life. I look at it as, if everyone in the building is successful, that's going to be a reflection on my team, our local school teams or administrative teams. That's been a step back where, every decision, like the flavor of the pizza, for the professional development day was getting chosen by me. Like, that was early on. Now it's like, okay, how many pizzas do we need to order? Is that enough? There are certain things you hold on to, and there's certain things you just have to let go of, and you have to trust your people. What I would say is hard in schools is, I've read this, wasn't a book, but I was watching this video, and they were saying you have to get people who think if people think 70% or can reach 70% of the way you would handle a situation, you're winning. So I've taken that as like and know your numbers. Like, if you go into a meeting and I ask you, hey, how many students are from these areas? What's our demographic? What's our poverty rate? Socioeconomic level, whatever you want to call that. How many kids are academically successful? How many kids are truant? If you're the truancy liaison, or you're the person who's handling enrollment, you need to know your numbers, because that's going to dictate a lot. And I think that, again, you think it's common sense, but I can tell you on the leadership end, it is 100% not. And so bringing people along to understand that that's part of it. Like, you have to know those numbers, even though they're numbers, they have relative value to how kids are successful. They have relative values to how culture works. So I think that's that. There's always going to be elements of culture that aren't happy. There just is. There's going to be people that just, the glass is always half empty. There's going to be people who, I think, to be honest, I think the other thing I would say is that I try to be nice to people, right? Like, I try to see their perspective on it. I had this emergency at home, and this happened, and this, and I was late for work because of this. Okay, like, I get it. There's emergencies that happen. If it's 15 days in a row, then I think you got to self-reflect on maybe figuring out another way to accept that challenge. But I do think that, like, I've always tried to be reasonable and nice to people. It doesn't always work. There are certainly two sides to every story, and it is hard. It's definitely hard. And just like anybody else, I make mistakes too. And I think I try to self-reflect on that. I try to make people better. If there's a way to get them to be better, as people or people for our organization, there's also sometimes like, it's just not a good fit. Like you're looking for something else, and I'm happy to like help you find somewhere else. But if we both agree on that, then it might be easier. If you just don't agree with the philosophy of the school, that's okay. 12,000 other people do. Like that's the way, that's like that. I think I've never said that context, but I've thought it, right? Like I think the context has been like, we don't want to lose you. Like you're important. You're a customer to us in the education world. We want your kid to be successful. If it's a parent I'm talking to, if it's a staff member, we want you to work here. We want you to be happy here. How can I make you happy here? And if the answer doesn't seem like I can reach it, well, then maybe at some point you're like, but I always try to make people happy, probably to a fault, but I try. I think sometimes that's just being nice to people.
I know that you always go the extra mile. No question about it. I also know how busy you are. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to wrap things up. But you'd mentioned just a minute ago about mistakes.
Yeah.
Is there one leadership failure that you've had that you've learned from and has made an impact on you?
There's many. There's many. So I think I'll vaguely mention two things. So we lost a student. Probably the hardest. I mean, it's still hard, but I think it was probably the hardest 6 months of my life. I'll never forget. My son was born, and I got a message. And you don't want to believe that anyone would ever get to a point where, they would feel as though, they don't want to be on earth anymore. And so I think, without getting into context or detail of that, obviously it was early enough in my career. We were having some successes. The school, one school at the time, there's a lot of context to it that I just, would relive over and over and over. Like, where did we make a mistake? Was this our fault? But regardless of whose fault it was or whatever, like this action happened. And I think what we, until this, like I never turned my phone off. Not that has anything to do with this situation, but like I never turned my phone off. So if I was away on Friday, I got a call Friday night, 8:00 from someone who doesn't normally call. And I picked it up, and, it was like, cause I thought something was wrong. Like you never know, it was this past fall, like 12:30, we got a safe to say from the state about a student. And I messaged my team at MaST One, and they all responded, every one of them, all the principals. And you never know when you're going to be able to save someone's life who's struggling. And so I think, I don't necessarily want to call that a failure per se, but obviously the outcome of any situation can reflect on you in a negative way. And so I think one of the things that we've tried to do is, mental health's a real thing. If we can support, people, families, kids, and understand that the dynamic of their social dynamic may be really impactful for the way they act, or I think that's big. I've also been, this is the pressure of this is the pressure people don't always think about. There was a student case with something last year, and at the end of the day, there's something called a superintendent save, where you can make a recommendation for a kid. And I mean, I must have played this case over and over in my head for like the 10-day period. And, I just wanted to see this kid graduate. Right. And I feel like you're in positions like that not everybody's going to agree with you.
Sure.
But, but eventually when you go to sleep at night, you're like, that kid walked across the stage, like after the, I felt like we made the right decision. It was hard along the way. He made a mistake, but like, it's just, there's things like that, both on the male and female side, right? Like I can give you example. There's also things that I go back on, and I'm like, I really feel like that perspective shifted over the last 10 or 11 years, right? Like, whereas when I first started, it was like, these are the rules. you know, this is what we have to do, you know, whereas I think now, like, it's a different world. And sometimes I feel like if we feel like we could really help somebody, if there's a way to do it, and maybe they have to do some other things. If they don't want to do anything to help themselves, I'm certainly not going to sit there and try and help them. But I think if, you know, so I always say that to our teams. It's like, I think there's still people, and, you know, you see all this stuff happen, you know, day in and day out. Like, it's hard to watch when you see stuff like the SEPTA incident, and, you know, and we were involved with that because it was so close to one of our campuses, and some other stuff was connected to it. Like, it's just, there's so many examples of that people don't see. And I will also say this, I think, like, again, like, it's not a failure, but I think every day we fail at something, and it's like, all right, well, how do we improve? Like, the question should be, how do we improve? Not necessarily how are we successful? How do we fail? Okay, but if we do something right, sure, celebrate your wins. I believe in that too. But I do think there are times where, what could we have done better next time should be the question, right? Versus, like, yeah, we failed. There are certainly days where I've walked in and be like, we were lousy today. Like, we didn't do this right. We should have done this. We missed this. But I always try to look at, like, both sides of it. Like, all right, if I started all over and did it this way, yes, but I wouldn't have learned that example for the next time, you know? So I'll take that to my career. I do also think, you know, people use the work-family balance. That is a challenging thing. It just is. It is very hard to be in this position. And it's just a hard thing. The other night, like, you know, my son was talking to me, and, like, I'm back and forth on messaging, and I'm, you know, and it's hard. It's just a hard, people don't realize that, you know, and it's 9:00 at night, but can it wait? Yeah. But, like, there's so many things that can wait. Like, it's just hard. It's a very difficult balance. So I do think there are certain things over time that I realize now that I didn't realize then, across the board. And I think that's a lesson for probably every position, every job, is that you don't want to look at it as, like, you definitely want to celebrate your wins, sure, but there's going to be failures weekly where we could have done something better in the eyes of somebody else. If we feel like we've done everything we can do and we've done it the right way, and that's been what we've tried to instill with the teams this year. One other thing I would say, sometimes having a conversation or documenting something goes a long way, right? And so I have learned that over the years too, you know, and again, there's, in my early years, I might have been a little more reactive. But now I've tried to take a step back and be like, all right, let me address what these things are and see if there can be an improvement. And I feel like that's, again, just experience, but it's like, yes, you know, they could have done this better, but they're doing these things, but let me document what they're doing well and what they're not doing well, versus not do that. And I think that, you know, and sometimes over the period of time, you know, I think that's actually been something I've self-reflected on and learned. But it's hard. It's a hard thing to do, you know, but sometimes it goes a long way.
It is. And, you know, I always say that we tend to learn the most from the things that we didn't do well, if we reflect on them, right? If we take those losses, those mistakes, those failures, and say, okay, what caused it? What did I learn from it? How can I not repeat that again? Those are the things that really stick in our minds and make a big difference, because it's easy. I don't want to say it's easy to win, but it's easy to win and not reflect on the win. But it's really harder to lose and not reflect on it and say, man, what led me to lose there? What led me to fail? And how can I get better for next time? And so I just think that embracing those learning lessons, I call them tuition lessons. They're tuition payments, right? Okay, we're all going to make mistakes at some point. So you make the payment, you learn from it, and then you add that education to your knowledge bank and you move forward and you don't repeat it. So, you know, taking the negative spin away from failure and saying, hey, that's a tuition payment. It cost me X to learn this, but now I'm not going to repeat it again. I think that's a big thing in leadership.
Yeah. And I think early on, the other thing that I'll just leave, at least in my personal experience, was, you know, when you earn respect in the leadership end, then it puts you in positions to be successful. So I do feel like over time, you know, that's been helpful. What's really tricky now is trying to balance that time for what's important, what's not, because everything's important. You're not going to be able to get to everything, right? And I do think that's, as I'm getting messages as I'm talking to you right now, I'm like, when do I fit in my mind? I'm always like, when do I fit this in? All right, I can call this person at 7:00 tonight when I'm leaving, but do they need me before that period of time? And when can I fit that in? Oh, I'm going to drive over to this campus. I have 10 minutes. Let me make that call. I think, that's important to them. I think that is time management is a tough thing. It just is. I think that is the advantage of a retail job. You work from this time to this time. And for the most part, when you're done your shift.
Right.
I don't think I ever operate that way. I would even leave selling something and be like, let me go home and research more about the Panasonic TV. Let me go home and Google, what's the best way to set up this network so I can figure this out. So I think that's something to instill in people too, is like, you don't know the answer. Rather than me give you what I think, why don't you look it up? You come back and tell me what you think. So that's something over time too. I've said to people, did you look it up? Did you Google it? Because that's what I'm going to do. And then, a lot of those answers are out there.
You're right. So John, I'm going to wrap it up with that. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Obviously people will pick up from the conversation that, we've known each other for a while. My kids all go to MaST. But, getting this perspective from you about leadership has just been awesome. I hope other people take things away from it as well. So thank you, John, for being on the show. And for anyone who's watching, listening, if you got something out of this, please like it, please share it, and please spread the word so that other people can learn these lessons as well. Until next time, thanks again, John.
Thank you.
I will see you on the next episode.